When I got married, I never told my husband or his mother that the apartment we were moving into was mine. I kept that secret close, tucked behind my smile, like a quiet promise to myself. And thank God I did, because after the wedding, they showed me exactly who they were. At first, everything felt like a dream I had waited too long to live. David brought me coffee in bed the morning after our wedding, kissed my forehead, and said, "This is our fresh start, sweetheart." His mother, Gloria, smiled that tight, polished smile that never quite reached her eyes. She hugged me and said, "I'm glad my son finally found someone who can make a home feel warm." Those were her exact words, "make a home feel warm." I should have known then that she didn't believe it was mine to begin with. For the first few weeks, I let her have her way. She was older, and I tried to be kind. I watched her move my furniture, replace my curtains with her heavy drapes, and fill my kitchen with her crystal bowls. "It looks more dignified this way," she said once, running her fingers over my oak table, as if she owned it. David just nodded along, the way sons often do when their mothers speak. I didn't argue. I told myself it was just temporary. But slowly, the air in my own apartment began to change. I started feeling like a guest in my own home. Gloria was always there, moving things around, correcting how I folded towels, how I seasoned food, even how I spoke. She'd laugh in that high, brittle way and say, "Oh, honey, you're sweet, but you have so much to learn." One afternoon, while David was at work, I found her standing by the living room window, holding a stack of mail that had just arrived. She flipped through it and said, "You know, you really should have these bills sent to David's name. It looks strange having them under yours." She said it lightly, like it was just a suggestion. But her eyes were sharp. I just smiled and said, "I'll think about it." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The quiet felt heavy, almost whispering. I thought about how easy it would have been to tell them the truth, that I'd bought this apartment years before I even met David, with my own savings after decades of hard work and quiet sacrifice. But I didn't. I let them believe it was his or ours, or whatever made them feel powerful. And yet, deep down, I was waiting, watching. Measuring every small act of control, every word Gloria dropped like a seed. I knew that kind of woman, the kind who pretends to care while slowly taking pieces of you, one permission at a time. So, I stayed quiet. I cooked dinner, smiled for photos, played the polite wife and dutiful daughter-in-law. I let them think they were winning. Because I've learned something in my 59 years, silence, when used wisely, isn't weakness. It's preparation, and I had no idea then how much I would need that silence, because the day they tried to take my home from me, the home I built with my own hands and heart, was the day they discovered who I truly was. It started with little things, tiny cracks behind polite smiles. Gloria would come by every morning with her grocery bags, filled with things I never asked for. "I brought fresh linens," she'd say, even though I'd just washed mine. She'd head straight to my closet, rearranging, replacing, taking quiet control over corners of my life I thought were safe. At first I brushed it off. I told myself she was just trying to help, to feel useful. But her help came with quiet judgment. "You really shouldn't buy these cheap brands," she'd murmur as she replaced my shampoo. Or, "David always liked his eggs runny, dear, not scrambled like this." Every word was dressed in sweetness but carried the sting of something sharper underneath. David began to change too. He wasn't cruel. Not yet, but he was distant. When I tried to tell him how I felt, he'd sigh and say, "Mom's just trying to help, Monica. Don't make it a thing. Don't make it a thing." That became his phrase for everything that hurt me. And little by little I started shrinking inside my own home. One evening I walked into the living room to find Gloria flipping through my mail again. This time she didn't even bother pretending it was an accident. I just wanted to make sure nothing important slipped through, she said, her tone flat. Then she looked up, her lips curling just slightly. You really should put David's name on the lease. It's just more proper. I smiled, a quiet, practiced smile, and said, I'll think about it. Inside, though, something started to stir. It wasn't anger. It was something calmer, deeper. A kind of steady knowing that I'd have to protect what was mine, not with shouting, but with strategy. Days passed, and Gloria made herself more at home. She started storing her coats in my closet. One morning I found her using my perfume. Oh, I just wanted to see how it smelled, she said casually, spraying another mist into the air like it was hers. David laughed when I told him. She's just being silly, honey. Don't take it so seriously. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and really looked at myself. My face, the faint lines around my mouth, the quiet tiredness in my eyes. I realized how slowly they'd been erasing me from my own story, one small act at a time. But here's the thing about women like me, women who've lived enough years to understand the language of silence. We don't fight every battle. We watch. We wait. We let people show us who they are before we decide when to speak. And as the weeks went on, I began to notice their rhythm, the way they whispered when I walked into a room, the way David avoided my eyes when money was mentioned, the way Gloria inspected every corner of the apartment, like she was memorizing it. I didn't react. I kept cooking, cleaning, and smiling. But in my mind, I was already building walls they couldn't see. Quiet walls made of paperwork, patience, and truth. Because one day I knew their smiles would slip completely. And when they did, I would be ready. That day came sooner than I expected. And it started with something as small as a missing key. It was a morning that started like any other, until I reached for my apartment keys and they weren't there. My hand froze over the counter. I checked my purse, my coat pocket, even the drawer where I always kept a spare. Nothing. Gloria was in the kitchen, humming lightly, holding a coffee mug as if nothing was wrong. Oh, I must have picked up yours by mistake, she said, her voice sweet, casual, but just slightly too sharp at the edges. Her eyes met mine for the tiniest moment, and I felt it, the first real hint that she knew exactly what she was doing. David wasn't home yet. I kept my voice calm. That's okay, I said. I smiled, but inside, a quiet alarm rang. This isn't an accident. It never had been. The days that followed confirmed it. The movers Gloria had casually invited over one afternoon weren't helping. They were there under her instructions, rearranging the apartment as if I were a guest, not the owner. They measured spaces, discussed furniture placement, and even asked if certain cabinets could be repainted. Gloria's smile never wavered. I just want everything perfect for you, she said. I nodded, pretending ignorance. Then there was the conversation that made my blood run cold. David mentioned casually, Mom said we should think about updating the paperwork on the apartment, just to avoid future confusion. His tone was easy, offhand, but the meaning was clear. They were plotting to take control, step by step. I said nothing. I let them think I was naive. I didn't need to, because I already knew the truth, and they didn't. The apartment had been mine long before I met David. I had signed every deed, every document, every insurance form. All of it was mine. They didn't know, and I intended to keep it that way until the moment I was ready. In the evenings, I started leaving small notes for myself, cataloging every interaction. Gloria's laughter as she opened my mail, David's soft-spoken phrases about making things easier for us. Every little detail, every pattern became a map I could read later. When the time came, I began confiding quietly in Nancy, my neighbor. She would sit with me in the kitchen while we drank tea, watching Gloria's busybody antics together. "You've got patience," Nancy said one day. "More than I could ever have." I smiled, sipping my tea, and replied, "Sometimes patience isn't enough, but it's a start." At night, I would stand by the living room window, watching my own home breathe in the quiet darkness. The apartment smelled like polished wood and warm coffee, familiar and mine. And yet I felt that tightening knot in my chest, the feeling that my sanctuary was under siege. I told myself not to rush. Revenge, if it came, would not be loud. It would be quiet, careful, and just. But first I had to wait, watch, learn. Let them believe they were in control. Because the moment they tried to take more than just keys, the moment they tried to take what truly belonged to me, I would be ready. And the first real test of their ambition came the day I overheard Gloria on the phone, speaking in a tone that chilled me to my bones. It was late morning when I first heard it clearly. Gloria on the phone, speaking in a low, calculated voice that made my stomach twist. I was in the kitchen, pretending to wash dishes, pretending not to hear, but every word hit me like ice water. "Don't worry, everything will be under David's name soon. Monica won't even know what's happening until it's done. She's predictable." The word predictable echoed in my mind long after she hung up. She didn't even try to hide her contempt anymore. My husband, my sweet David, walked in just as I set down the last plate. He smiled at me, oblivious, and said, "Mom and I are just trying to make things easier for everyone. You'll understand soon." His eyes flicked to mine, searching for reassurance. I gave him a gentle nod, the same one I had given him countless times before, while inside I felt my heart tighten. I didn't confront them. I didn't raise my voice. That would have been a mistake. Instead, I went about my day, moving through the apartment that was mine, touching the surfaces, feeling the warmth I had built over years. It was surreal. The very people I trusted were planning to erase me from the home I loved, and they didn't even realize I knew. Gloria continued her small invasions with a new boldness. She moved my books, commenting on how dusty they were, and rearranged the living room again, explaining to David, "I just want it to feel like they're home." She emphasized the word "there," and I let it pass. I smiled while my mind quietly catalogued every act, every word, every small attempt to claim what was mine. David tried to act neutral, but I could see the tension behind his smile. He didn't want conflict, but he was beginning to side with his mother without realizing it. And Gloria, well, she thrived on his hesitation, his fear of upsetting her. She whispered to him, and he listened. It was subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but I saw it all. That evening, I sat alone on the couch, a cup of tea cooling in my hands, and I thought about what I had learned in my 59 years. Women like Gloria think they are untouchable. That charm and seniority give them power over others. But the quiet, patient ones, the ones who endure, who observe, who never let their own hands shake in the face of manipulation, we have a strength they will never see coming. I knew then that I needed a plan. Not a loud plan. Not a confrontation that would erupt in anger and regret. A slow, deliberate, quiet reclaiming of what was mine. The kind of plan that doesn't just correct the injustice, but makes it crystal clear who truly holds power, without me ever needing to raise my voice. I closed my eyes that night and imagined the apartment finally peaceful again. Every corner, every surface, every familiar scent belonged to me, and only me. I could almost feel the calm that would come when Gloria realized her schemes had failed. And I knew the moment was approaching. The moment when they would show me their true faces again. And this time, it would be too late for them to undo what I had quietly prepared. The first step in their undoing came unexpectedly, in the form of an official letter that arrived on my doorstep the very next morning. The letter arrived quietly, slipped under the door, almost invisible against the welcome mat. I picked it up with trembling hands, feeling the crisp weight of paper that carried more tension than words. The envelope was from a title company. Someone had requested an appraisal of the apartment. I knew immediately who was behind it. Gloria and David had taken the first step toward trying to claim what was mine, but I didn't panic. I folded the letter carefully, placed it on the counter, and walked to the window, letting the late afternoon sun wash over me. My apartment smelled faintly of the lavender cleaner I'd used that morning, comforting and familiar, like a small reassurance that this home had always belonged to me. That evening, I called Tom Riley, an old friend and a lawyer I trusted. Tom had been a quiet presence in my life for years, someone I could lean on without fear of judgment. I explained everything. Gloria's manipulations, David's blind trust in her, the appraisal notice. He listened calmly, letting me speak, until I had emptied my heart. "Monica," he said finally, his voice steady, "you've got all the leverage. The apartment is legally yours, correct?" "Yes," I whispered, the words soft but firm. "Completely. I don't want this to escalate in anger. I want it quiet. I want them to learn without realizing I'm teaching them." Tom chuckled lightly. "Then patience is your greatest weapon. We'll prepare everything quietly. Just let them make their moves. When the time comes, it will all be crystal clear who the real owner is." I hung up and sank into the couch, feeling a calm settle over me. It wasn't peace yet. But it was the kind of quiet strength that comes from knowing you are prepared. The apartment felt alive with possibility. The soft creak of the hardwood under my feet, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the sunlight catching the edge of the coffee table. Every detail a reminder that this was mine, and I would not surrender it. Over the next few days, I moved subtly. I checked all the documents, ensured everything was in order, and even added a private clause in the deed that prevented any transfer, without my signature. Every precaution was quiet, almost invisible but deliberate. Meanwhile, Gloria continued her small intrusions, unaware that her plans were slowly unraveling. Nancy, my neighbor, noticed my quiet vigilance. She stopped by one afternoon with tea and a knowing smile. "You're ready for whatever comes next," she said softly. I nodded, taking comfort in her presence. It felt good to share my silent burden with someone who understood, someone who could witness without interfering. At night, I walked through the apartment slowly, touching the surfaces as I had done since moving in. Each step was deliberate, each breath a meditation. I imagined the moment when Gloria's schemes would crumble, when David would realize that his assumptions about ownership had been wrong all along. The thought didn't fill me with rage. It filled me with clarity, peace, and quiet anticipation. I knew that my patience, my careful observation, and my secret, the secret that the apartment had always been mine, would soon speak louder than any argument, louder than any confrontation. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long while, the calm before the storm. Because when they came for the keys again, they would find that the doors were already locked in my favor. It happened on a quiet Thursday morning. I arrived home from a quick walk around the neighborhood, the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the cafe on the corner, and found the hallway different. Gloria was standing near the front door, arms folded, a faint smirk playing on her lips. David was beside her, hesitant, his hands in his pockets. "You're early," Gloria said, her tone light but precise. "We thought it was time for some boundaries." I raised an eyebrow, my voice calm, even soft. "That won't be necessary." She looked at me, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, like she hadn't expected me to speak with such certainty. David cleared his throat. "Mom, maybe we should just—" I cut him off gently, pulling a folder from my bag and setting it on the console table. "I've already taken care of everything," I said. "The building manager can confirm." The building manager, who had arrived a few minutes earlier, nodded as I handed over the necessary documents. The apartment was legally mine. Every key, every lock, every paper reflected that. Gloria's smirk faltered. David's jaw tightened. They had assumed that changing the locks would give them power, but the power was never theirs to take. Gloria's eyes narrowed, trying to hide the shock. "But how?" she whispered, almost to herself. I smiled faintly, my voice steady, almost tender. "I own this place, all of it. Legally, you don't have the authority to change a thing without my consent." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that carries a weight too heavy to break with idle words. Gloria's pride crumbled slowly, painfully, like fine sand slipping through fingers. David looked between us, a mixture of guilt and awe in his eyes, realizing for the first time that he had been manipulated by his mother. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply let the truth speak for itself. The apartment, every corner I had touched and cherished for years, belonged to me. The calm I had cultivated over weeks, the quiet patience, had turned the tables without anger, without confrontation. Later that evening, I sat in the living room tracing my fingers along the arm of the sofa. The sunlight was soft, filtering through the windows just as it always had. Every shadow, every familiar sound, every little creak of the floorboard reminded me that this home was mine, not just on paper, but in heart and soul. Nancy stopped by with tea. "You handled that beautifully," she said, setting the cup beside me. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of quiet triumph. Not vindictive, not angry, just peace. And in that moment I realized that true power doesn't come from forcing control. It comes from patience, from observation, from understanding your own worth, and from quietly claiming what is yours, without the need to shout or threaten. Because when they thought they had the upper hand, I had been preparing all along. Every move they made, every attempt at manipulation, had only strengthened my resolve, and soon the next step would arrive, the one that would finally make them see, without a word, without fury, that the apartment, my home, had always belonged to me. It all came together quietly, without fanfare. A week after the lock incident, I sat at the kitchen table, with Tom Riley, my lawyer and old friend, going over the final documents. Every clause, every signature, every line had been double-checked. Gloria and David had made their move, but I was ready for the next, and it would be calm, precise, and absolute. When the notice was served, I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant in a loud way. I simply handed the papers to the building manager, who delivered them to Gloria and David. And then I waited, watching from the living room, listening to their voices in the hallway as they read, realizing what had just happened. Gloria's voice faltered first. "But this isn't possible. You can't do this." I stood by the doorway, my posture relaxed, my voice soft. "Some homes are built on trust," I said. "You burned that foundation yourself." David's face turned pale. He stumbled over words, trying to defend himself, trying to explain his loyalty to his mother. But the truth was clear, undeniable. The apartment had always been mine. Every attempt they made to control it, to manipulate it, to take it from me, had been quietly countered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply let them feel the weight of their own actions. Every word they had whispered about ownership, every plan they had made to manipulate me, now lay bare before them. After they left, the sound of their footsteps fading down the hall, I walked slowly through the apartment. Every room felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. The air was lighter, the light falling through the windows softer, warmer. I could breathe fully again, knowing that my space, my sanctuary, was mine and mine alone. Nancy came over later that afternoon. She brought tea and a quiet smile. "It's over," she said softly. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words sink in. The storm had passed, but the calm that followed was more powerful than any fury could have been. I sat by the window, watching the sun touch the tops of the trees on the street outside. Gloria's schemes had failed. David had learned the cost of blind obedience, and I had reclaimed not only my home but my peace of mind. It was subtle, poetic, and completely satisfying. Because sometimes revenge doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments, in the careful preparation, in the dignity of standing firm and letting the truth speak for itself. That evening, I poured myself a cup of tea and walked slowly through the apartment. The scent of lavender, the smooth oak under my fingers, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, every detail reminded me that I had won not with anger, but with patience, clarity, and resolve. And as I sat there, the apartment finally at peace, I realized that my home had never just been about bricks or keys. It had been about respect, trust, and the quiet power of knowing your own worth. The apartment had never felt so alive. Not with noise, not with chatter, not with manipulation, just with the steady, comforting rhythm of my own life. I walked slowly from room to room, touching the familiar surfaces, inhaling the faint scent of lavender and polished wood. Every corner told a story, my story, and it was finally uninterrupted. Weeks had passed since Gloria and David were served the notice. They had left quietly, their pride fractured, their schemes laid bare. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate loudly. I simply lived. The quiet victory was richer than any shout, sweeter than any confrontation. The apartment belonged to me, as it had always been, but more importantly, my peace belonged to me too. Nancy stopped by one afternoon with her usual warmth and a fresh batch of cookies. We sat in the sunlit kitchen, sipping tea, and laughed softly at small memories. The ones that had nothing to do with the chaos that had come before. I felt gratitude not just for the victory, but for the clarity that came with it. I had learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it quietly reclaims everything that is yours. I spent hours repainting, rearranging, and breathing life back into spaces that had felt foreign. Each movement was deliberate, each small detail a reaffirmation of ownership, of dignity, of self. I thought about David, about Gloria, and about the way people reveal themselves when they believe they are untouchable. And I smiled softly. Their actions had been a lesson, not a punishment. Sitting by the window that evening, watching the street glow in the gentle light of the setting sun, I reflected on everything, the fear, the quiet tension, the patience, and finally the satisfaction of reclaiming my home. I understood now that revenge is not always about hurting others. True revenge is about reclaiming your peace, your dignity, and your boundaries. It is quiet, it is deliberate, and it is entirely yours. And as I sipped the last of my tea, I whispered to myself, just as I had countless nights before, silence, patience, and clarity are sometimes the most powerful forces of all. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes silence teaches more than words. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Maybe your voice will be next on Her Voice.